Ladies and gentlemen, we live in a world that glorifies noise, a world where the loudest voice is often mistaken for the wisest, a world that praises speed and labels stillness as laziness. But let me ask you something. When was the last time you allowed yourself to be quiet? When was the last time you practiced true patience, not because you had to, but because you chose to? There is a kind of energy that doesn't shout. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't race against the clock. But it changes lives, it moves mountains, it inspires. That energy is patience. That energy is silence. One. Silence creates space for truth. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of awareness. When you choose silence, you make space for the truth to rise from within. Most people avoid silence because they're afraid of what they might hear, the doubts, the fears, the unfinished business within. But those are exactly the things that guide us to our real self. In silence, we strip away the noise of the world and finally hear what matters, who we are, what we believe, and why we're here. You don't find clarity in chaos. You find it in stillness. The most powerful answers in life are not shouted. They are whispered in quiet moments of reflection. 2. Patience is the architecture of growth. We want results now. We want change today. We want to become the best version of ourselves without going through the painful middle. But nature doesn't operate that way. A tree doesn't force itself to grow. It roots itself, endures the seasons, and rises, slowly, surely, with strength. Patience doesn't mean sitting idle. It means you do the work and you trust the process. The strongest people are not those who rush forward blindly. They are those who know when to pause, when to wait, and when to move. Growth that lasts is not microwaved. It's marinated over time in the quiet, patient choices we make every day. 3. Silence disarms conflict and builds connection. Think of the last argument you had. Now ask yourself, did your volume help or hurt? Silence is not weakness. In fact, it's one of the most disarming forces in communication. When we stop reacting and start listening, people feel seen. When we resist the urge to interrupt, people feel valued. True connection doesn't come from how loudly we speak, it comes from how deeply we listen. Silence is the doorway to empathy, and in a world divided by shouting, those who master the power of silence will be the ones who bring us back together. 4. Patience reveals what time is hiding. Not everything can be seen in the moment. Sometimes the clarity we seek is buried beneath the dust of time. Patience allows the truth to surface when it's ready. How many times have we misunderstood a situation, only to realize months later that we didn't have all the information? Patience helps us wait for the full picture. It helps us see beyond our emotions and judgments. It teaches us to stop making permanent decisions based on temporary feelings. Time doesn't always heal everything, but it always reveals everything. And if we're patient enough, we learn that what looked like a failure was a lesson. What felt like a setback was a setup. And what seemed like silence was preparation. 5. Together, silence and patience are a force of leadership. The greatest leaders are not the loudest in the room. They are the ones who make space for others to rise. They don't react impulsively. They respond intentionally. They are not controlled by urgency. They are grounded in purpose. Patience allows them to endure the weight. Silence gives them the wisdom to act at the right time. These leaders know that power is not always about control, it's about presence. And presence begins with inner calm. So today, I challenge you not to shout louder, not to move faster, but to be still long enough to hear your own truth. To be patient enough to grow roots before you chase the sky. Because silence is not empty. It is full of answers, and patience is not passive. It is the discipline of faith. The world doesn't need more noise. It needs more people who lead from stillness. Silence is not about shutting the world out. It's about letting your inner world speak. In a time when everything demands a reaction, tweets, notifications, arguments, and expectations, we rarely pause long enough to ask ourselves if we're reacting or responding, and that difference is everything. Reactions are emotional, instant, and often thoughtless. Responses are grounded, deliberate, and wise. The space between stimulus and response is silence, and that space is where self-awareness is born. When you choose silence, not as avoidance but as presence, You allow your mind to breathe and your heart to speak. It is in silence that clarity reveals itself. So many people go through life seeking answers from outside, books, gurus, mentors, podcasts, and while these sources can guide us, the deepest truths are already within, but they are buried under the noise. When we are constantly stimulated, constantly distracted, we drown out the quiet voice that knows what we need. In silence, that voice becomes audible. You begin to hear the gentle nudge that says, "This isn't for you," or "You were made for more." You start to notice patterns. What energizes you, what drains you, who makes you feel seen, and who makes you feel small. Silence becomes the mirror that doesn't lie. People often confuse silence with weakness, but it takes great strength to be silent. It takes courage to listen instead of speak, to pause instead of react, to observe without judgment. That's because silence demands vulnerability. It asks you to face yourself without filters, and that's not easy. But it's essential. Because without that confrontation, we live lives based on other people's expectations, chasing goals we don't really value, saying yes when we mean no. Silence strips away all that. It brings us back to center. Think of the great moments of your life, not the noisy ones, but the ones that left you breathless, the moment you realized who you loved, the second you knew a job wasn't right for you, the peaceful quiet of a sunrise when no one else was awake. These moments weren't loud, they were sacred, and silence made them possible. Even in conflict, silence can be transformational. It gives you the upper hand not through control, but through understanding. When you don't jump to defend yourself, you give space for the other person's emotions to surface. You hear not just their words, but what's behind them. You recognize their pain, their fear, their need. And in doing so, you often diffuse what words would have escalated. Silence is the pause that allows empathy to enter the room. There's a reason why the wisest people speak less. They're not hiding, they're thinking. They're listening, they're absorbing. They know that once words are spoken, they can't be taken back. So they choose them with care, and that choice begins in silence. In a world that urges you to speak up, stand out, and be loud, choosing silence is not giving up your power, it's learning how to use it with precision. Patience is not the ability to wait. It's how you behave while you wait. It's not just about sitting still, counting the minutes until something happens. Patience is an act of deep trust. It is rooted in the belief that meaningful things take time, that growth cannot be rushed, and that some of the most extraordinary outcomes require seasons of unseen progress. In a culture obsessed with instant gratification, where success is often measured by how quickly something is achieved, patience feels like a lost art. But those who truly understand the rhythm of life know that patience is the architecture of real growth. Every great achievement, whether it's a towering redwood tree, a symphony, a relationship, or a character of integrity, takes time. You don't plant a seed today and expect fruit tomorrow. You nurture it. You protect it, you give it room to grow, and some days nothing seems to happen. There's no visible progress. It feels like effort without reward. But in those silent moments, transformation is happening beneath the surface. The roots are forming, the foundation is strengthening, and that hidden growth is what will sustain the visible results later. Patience is what allows us to stay grounded in the waiting. When we're impatient, we force things. We rush decisions. We compromise values for results. We sacrifice quality for speed, and in doing so, we often sabotage the very things we're trying to build. Patience teaches us to trust timing. It teaches us that just because something isn't happening now doesn't mean it never will. It gives us the wisdom to differentiate between urgency and importance. Urgency is emotional and reactive. Importance is intentional and lasting. Patience aligns us with what matters. Patience is not passive, it's active. It's about showing up every day, doing the work, even when there's no applause. It's about continuing to build, to prepare, to refine, because you believe in the outcome. Athletes train for years before they ever compete on a global stage. Writers draft pages that never get published. Entrepreneurs launch ideas that fail before they succeed. The world only sees the breakthrough, but it's patience that makes the breakthrough possible. It's in the days of obscurity, repetition, and even boredom that resilience is forged. And that resilience becomes the very foundation of success. Patience also creates space for self-discovery. When we don't rush the process, we have time to reflect, to learn, to adapt. We're more likely to course correct, to notice red flags, to make wiser decisions. In the rush to make it, we can lose ourselves, but patience invites us to become someone worth becoming, not just someone who achieves things. It reminds us that who we are in the process is just as important as what we're trying to achieve. And often, the delay isn't a denial, it's a gift. It's life giving us time to grow into the person who can truly handle what we're asking for. Patience doesn't mean we stop moving forward. It means we keep moving with purpose, trusting that the journey itself is shaping us for something far greater than we imagined. Conflict is inevitable, but chaos is optional, and the way we communicate in those moments of tension can either break a relationship or build a deeper bond. When voices rise, when tempers flare, and egos take the stage, it's easy to believe that the one who speaks the most or the loudest has the upper hand. But often, the most powerful presence in the room is the one who knows when not to speak at all. Silence isn't a retreat, it's a strategy. It's the discipline of restraint, the strength to hold space instead of filling it, and the wisdom to listen beyond the words being said. When we choose silence in conflict, we give ourselves a chance to respond instead of react. Emotions are high in moments of disagreement, anger, frustration, defensiveness. Reacting from that emotional space often leads to more damage than resolution, but silence becomes a pause button for the storm. It lets the temperature drop, it lets clarity emerge, and most importantly, it makes room for empathy, because the longer you listen, the more you start to hear what's not being said. The fear behind the anger, the hurt behind the blame, the longing behind the accusation. Silence doesn't just give us perspective, it helps us offer compassion where we might otherwise offer judgment. In a conversation, silence signals respect. It tells the other person that their voice matters. That you're not just waiting to talk, but genuinely trying to understand, and understanding doesn't require agreement. You can disagree deeply with someone and still give them the dignity of being heard. That kind of silence doesn't shrink connection, it strengthens it. It invites openness, it lowers defenses. It creates an atmosphere where honesty can thrive, and that's where real breakthroughs begin. We often think influence is tied to how persuasively we speak, but in truth, some of the greatest influence we hold is in how we make others feel when they're with us. Silence, when used intentionally, creates safety. It tells people, you don't have to perform here, you don't have to defend yourself here, you are free to be seen, and being seen, really seen, is one of the most powerful human experiences in relationships, whether personal, professional, or public. Silence can become a healing tool. Sometimes people don't need advice, they don't need solutions, they need presence. They need someone to sit with them without fixing them, and silence becomes the language of that presence. It's the quiet assurance that says, I'm here, I see you, I'm not leaving. No words required. Learning to be silent in the right moments also teaches us humility. It reminds us that we don't always have to be right, we don't always have to win the argument, and we don't always need the last word. We begin to value peace over pride, connection over control, and in doing so, we stop seeing conflict as something to conquer, and start seeing it as an opportunity to understand. The power of silence in these moments is not in what it takes away, but in what it makes possible. There are moments in life when we are desperate for clarity, craving answers, and aching to understand why things are unfolding the way they are. But life doesn't always respond on demand. Some truths are not available in the moment. They are revealed only through time. Patience, then, becomes more than just a virtue. It becomes a lens. It gives us the ability to wait long enough to see what time is hiding. The challenge is that we are often too close to our problems to see them clearly. We get tangled in emotion, assumptions, fear, and urgency. But with patience, the emotional fog begins to lift, and we start to recognize what was once obscured. Many people rush to conclusions not because they are foolish, but because they are uncomfortable with not knowing. Uncertainty is hard. Waiting without clarity can feel unbearable. but acting too soon often leads to regret. How many times have we made a decision in haste, only to realize later that we didn't have the full picture? Patience doesn't just help us avoid mistakes. It grants us the gift of perspective. With time, the story changes, motives become clearer, patterns emerge, relationships reveal their true nature. What once seemed like betrayal might be protection. What felt like failure might have been redirection. But you can only see these things if you're willing to wait long enough to let the truth surface. Time is not the enemy, it is a teacher. It's constantly unfolding the wisdom that only becomes visible when you're not forcing the outcome. Patience slows us down long enough to ask better questions. Instead of demanding, "Why is this happening to me?" we start to ask, "What is this teaching me?" That shift alone can change everything. Because once we see life as a teacher instead of a threat, we stop resisting it. We lean in, we become students of our own journey. There's a subtle transformation that occurs in the waiting. The longer we wait, the more we grow, and that growth doesn't just help us survive the delay. It helps us become someone who's capable of stewarding what's coming next. Sometimes the delay is not about the goal at all. It's about shaping the person, and that kind of internal transformation can't be rushed. You can't microwave maturity. You can't fast track wisdom. These are the rewards of walking through time with your eyes open and your spirit awake. Patience also protects us from reacting to temporary emotions. Feelings are real, but they are not always reliable. They change, they fluctuate, they pass. Acting out of a temporary emotion can have permanent consequences. But patience gives us space to process. It helps us question our impulses before they lead to irreversible damage. It teaches us to pause when we're triggered and to reflect when we're unsure. The world moves fast, but wisdom waits. And when we wait with intention, not passively, but with alertness, we begin to uncover what the moment alone could not reveal. Patience doesn't just show us more. It shows us what truly matters. Leadership is often portrayed as charisma, command, and control. The person who speaks first, moves fast, and dominates the room. But the most impactful leaders often lead with presence, not pressure. They understand that their strength lies not in how loudly they speak, but in how deeply they listen. They embody patience and silence not as weaknesses, but as strategic tools that shape their influence. A leader grounded in silence and patience doesn't rush to react or scramble for control. They observe, they absorb, and they act only when it matters. That kind of presence commands respect without demanding it. In moments of crisis, people don't look to the loudest voice. They look to the calmest one. Silence in the hands of a wise leader becomes a stabilizing force. It communicates that not every question needs an immediate answer, and not every problem needs an impulsive solution. Leaders who pause create space for better thinking, for input from others, and for wisdom to surface. In a world obsessed with being first and being fast, they remind us that clarity often comes to those who wait. They model restraint in the face of urgency and inspire confidence through their steady presence. Patience, too, plays a defining role in how leaders grow others. Great leadership is not about pulling people to where you want them to be. It's about walking beside them until they're ready to rise. That takes patience. It takes believing in someone's potential even when it's not visible yet. It means holding space for failure, for learning, for trying again. Patience allows leaders to coach rather than criticize, to build people instead of breaking them down, and in doing so, they create loyalty, trust, and long-term impact, because people remember how you made them feel when they were struggling, not when they were winning. Silence also gives leaders the ability to hear what others overlook. In meetings, in conversations, in moments of conflict, there's often more being communicated in what isn't said than in what is. A silent leader picks up on tone, on tension, on the subtle cues that others miss. They're attuned to the room, not just the agenda. They can pause a conversation to ask the right question at the right time, and that question often opens the door to break through ideas or buried concerns. Their silence becomes an invitation for others to speak, and in that speaking, innovation and truth emerge. What makes these kinds of leaders truly powerful is that they are not driven by ego. They're not seeking the spotlight. They don't need to prove anything. Their authority comes from within, not from titles, and that inner authority is shaped in silence and strengthened through patience. These leaders don't react to noise, they rise above it. They don't rush results, they cultivate excellence. They don't manipulate outcomes, they nurture growth. In the end, it's not their words that inspire us most, it's their example, their stillness, their presence. Their ability to stand in the storm without losing their calm. And that, more than anything, is what makes them unforgettable. So, where does that leave us? In a world that urges us to speak louder, move faster, and do more, we must reclaim what truly sets us apart. The quiet strength of patience and the unwavering power of silence. These are not passive states. They are intentional choices, they are acts of courage, they are declarations that we are not ruled by noise or pressure, but by clarity, purpose, and inner conviction. Patience teaches us that growth is not a race, it's a rhythm. Silence reminds us that wisdom doesn't shout, it listens. Together, they form a foundation not just for personal peace, but for powerful leadership, meaningful connection, and lasting transformation. So the next time the world demands you to react, pause. When you feel the urge to force a result, wait. When everything around you is loud, choose stillness, because in that quiet, you will find your strength. In that waiting, you will uncover your power. And in that silence, you will hear your true voice, the one that was never lost, only buried beneath the noise. Lead with presence, live with patience, and let your silence speak the loudest.